Hi, I'm Emma. I lived as the forgotten daughter for 24 years, watching my sister Madison float through life, collecting everything that should have been mine. The night before my wedding, she slipped into my childhood bedroom wearing my custom Vera Wang gown and whispered, "David realized he's marrying the wrong sister." That was the moment I discovered that loyalty was just another word people used when it was convenient. So I disappeared. 8 years later, when Madison's divorce papers were being signed in a downtown law firm, she looked across the conference room and saw me sitting beside my husband, a man whose net worth made headlines. But by then, it was already too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the weight of that moment when I found Madison in my dress. The silk whispered against the hardwood floor of our family home as she turned toward me, her reflection multiplied in the antique mirror that had belonged to our grandmother. The dress fit her perfectly, which shouldn't have surprised me. We'd always been the same size, though somehow Madison had always worn everything better. At least, that's what everyone told us. "You can't be serious," I breathed, my hand gripping the doorframe so tightly my knuckles went white. The wedding was in 18 hours. My wedding. The one I'd been planning for 2 years, saving every penny from my job at the marketing firm to afford the dress that now adorned my sister's body like it had been made for her. Madison smoothed the intricate beadwork along the bodice with practiced fingers. "David came to see me tonight," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone she used when delivering news she knew would devastate me. "We talked for hours, Emma. Really talked. He realized that he's been settling." The words hit me like physical blows, settling. As if our 3-year relationship, our shared dreams, our planned future together, were nothing more than David accepting less than he deserved. I watched my sister admire herself in my wedding dress, and something fundamental shifted inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Something that felt like clarity. "Where is he?" I asked quietly. Madison met my eyes in the mirror. "Gone. He didn't want to hurt you more than necessary, so he thought it would be easier if he just wasn't here when you found out." I laughed then, a sound that surprised even me. It wasn't bitter or hysterical. It was the laugh of someone finally understanding a joke they'd been missing their entire life. "Of course he did. Let you do his dirty work while he disappears." "Don't be like that," Madison said, turning to face me directly. "This isn't about hurting you. It's about being honest about what we all know. David needs someone who can match his ambition, his social circles. Someone who can elevate him, not hold him back. Someone like her," she meant. Madison, who had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in international business. Madison, who spoke 3 languages and had spent a summer interning at a prestigious firm in London. Madison, who had always been everything I wasn't, polished, connected, effortlessly sophisticated. I stood there in my pajamas, looking at my sister wearing my wedding dress, and finally understood something I'd been too naive to see before. This wasn't about David choosing between us. This was about Madison deciding she wanted something that belonged to me, and taking it. Just like she'd taken my acceptance letter to Columbia when we were 18, claiming the admissions office had made a mistake and sent it to the wrong sister. Just like she'd taken the promotion at our father's company that had been promised to me. Just like she'd taken every opportunity, every relationship, every moment of pride that had ever been within my reach. "Take off my dress," I said calmly. Madison blinked, perhaps surprised by my tone. "Emma, you're being dramatic. We can work this out. You can still be my maid of honor when David and I—" "Take off my dress," I repeated, "or I'll call the police and report it stolen." Something flickered across Madison's face. Surprise, maybe, or the first hint of uncertainty. In our entire lives, I had never stood up to her directly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I had complained to our parents, cried to friends, swallowed my hurt and moved on. But I had never looked her in the eye and drawn a line she couldn't cross. "You wouldn't," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Try me." We stared at each other for a long moment, sisters who had shared a womb but had never truly shared anything else. Finally, Madison reached for the zipper at the back of the dress. "Fine. But Emma, you need to understand that this is for the best. David would have left you eventually anyway. At least this way, it stays in the family." As she slipped out of the dress and handed it to me, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not relief, not sadness, but a strange sense of freedom. The dress was just fabric and thread now. The marriage it represented was already over. And for the first time in my life, I could see clearly what my family really thought of me. I was the backup plan. The consolation prize. The one who got the leftovers after Madison had taken her pick. Not anymore. The next morning, I called the venue and canceled everything. The caterer, the florist, the photographer who had captured our engagement photos on the beach in Santa Monica. Each phone call was another small death, another dream dissolved. But with each cancellation, I felt lighter somehow. Freer. Our parents, Robert and Catherine Pierce, handled the situation with their usual approach. They swept in with damage control and strategic messaging, protecting Madison's reputation while treating my heartbreak as an unfortunate but manageable inconvenience. My mother spent the day fielding calls from relatives and family friends, explaining that there had been a change of plans but everyone should still attend the celebration that evening, now in honor of David and Madison's surprise engagement. "These things happen, sweetheart," my father said, patting my shoulder with the same gesture he used when one of his business deals fell through. "Better to find out now than after you're legally bound to him." My mother was more direct. "Honestly, Emma, David was always a bit above your league. Madison is better suited to handle a man with his potential. You'll find someone more appropriate." More appropriate. As if love were a matter of matching tax brackets and social standings. As if David leaving me for my sister was just a natural correction of some cosmic imbalance. I spent that evening packing. Not frantically, not emotionally, but with methodical precision. I folded clothes, sorted books, wrapped the few pieces of jewelry that belonged to me rather than Madison. Our childhood bedroom looked strange, with only her possessions remaining. Her debate team trophies, her sorority composite photos, her collection of awards and accolades that told the story of a golden child's perfect life. As I sealed the last box, Madison appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a different dress now, a stunning red number that complemented her dark hair and made her look like she belonged on a magazine cover. David stood behind her, his hand resting possessively on her waist. "Emma," David said, his voice careful and controlled. "I hope you can understand that none of this was planned. Sometimes feelings just develop." I looked at him, this man I'd thought I would spend my life with. Tall, conventionally handsome, ambitious in the way that Madison found irresistible. He was exactly the kind of man she'd always ended up with, successful enough to enhance her image, traditional enough to want a wife who would elevate his status. "How long?" I asked. David and Madison exchanged a glance. "Does it matter?" Madison said. "How long?" I repeated. 6 months, David admitted quietly. "Since your birthday party." 6 months. Half a year of shared beds and shared lies. Half a year of David kissing me goodnight while planning a future with my sister. Half a year of Madison asking about wedding details and offering to help with arrangements for a marriage she was actively sabotaging. "I see," I said. And I did. Finally, clearly, completely. "Emma, we want you to know that you'll always be family," Madison said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending kindness that made my skin crawl. "We hope that in time you'll be able to celebrate our happiness." I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. As I passed them, I paused and looked directly into Madison's eyes. "You can have him," I said quietly. "You can have the house, the wedding, the whole life you've planned. But understand this. You didn't win anything, you just revealed what you both really are." David's face flushed. "That's not fair, Emma. We fell in love. That's not something we could control." I smiled then, the same calm smile I'd given Madison the night before. "You're right. You couldn't control falling in love. But you could control lying to me for 6 months. You could control planning to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. You could control treating me like an obstacle to remove rather than a person deserving of basic honesty. Madison stepped forward, her expression hardening. Don't be self-righteous, Emma. You were never right for David, and deep down you know it. I'm doing you a favor. Thank you, I said, and meant it. You've shown me exactly who you are. Both of you. That's a gift that we'll keep on giving. I walked out of that house with 2 suitcases and $3,000 in my savings account. I didn't know where I was going, or what I would do when I got there. But for the first time in my 24 years, I was moving towards something that belonged entirely to me. Behind me, I could hear Madison's laughter mixing with the sound of guests arriving for what should have been my wedding reception. The celebration would go on without me, just as my family's life had always gone on around me rather than including me. But I was no longer the girl who stood on the sidelines watching other people live the life she wanted. I was someone else entirely, someone I was just beginning to meet. The drive to San Francisco took 8 hours. I chose the city because it was far enough from Los Angeles to feel like a real escape, but close enough that I could afford the gas to get there. More importantly, it was a place where nobody knew me as Madison Pierce's little sister, or David Chen's discarded fiancé. I could be just Emma, whatever that meant. I found a studio apartment in the Richmond district, a tiny space with thin walls and a view of the fog rolling in from the Pacific. The rent took most of my savings, but it was mine. No family photos on the walls, no shared spaces, no compromises with someone else's taste or needs. Just 4 walls and the freedom to figure out who I was when nobody was watching. The job market was brutal. My marketing degree from USC was solid but unremarkable, and my experience at small firms in Los Angeles didn't carry much weight in a city filled with tech startups and innovative agencies. I applied for dozens of positions, collected rejection emails like sad souvenirs, and slowly watched my savings account dwindle towards zero. 3 months after leaving Los Angeles, I was working the night shift at a 24-hour diner in the Mission District, serving coffee to insomniacs and early shift workers who stumbled in looking for caffeine and carbohydrates. It wasn't the career I'd planned, but it paid my rent and asked nothing of me beyond showing up and doing the work. One night in November, a woman came in around 2 in the morning. She was probably in her 50s, well-dressed despite the hour, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that missed nothing. She ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, then sat in the corner booth with a laptop and a stack of papers that she spread across the table like a general planning a campaign. "Late night?" I asked when I refilled her coffee cup for the 3rd time. She looked up from her papers and smiled. "Early morning, actually. I'm launching a new venture, and the only time I can think clearly is when the rest of the world is asleep." There was something about her presence that made me linger by her table instead of moving on to the next customer. She radiated the kind of confidence I'd always associated with Madison, but warmer, more genuine, as if her success came from building things rather than taking them. "What kind of venture?" I asked. "Digital marketing for sustainable fashion brands," she said, gesturing toward her laptop screen. "Helping companies tell authentic stories about ethical manufacturing and environmental responsibility. The industry is changing, and the brands that adapt first will dominate the market." I found myself genuinely interested for the first time in months. That sounds incredible. The intersection of marketing and social responsibility is fascinating. She studied my face with sharp, assessing eyes. "You know something about marketing?" "I used to," I said, then caught myself. I have a degree in it. I worked for a few agencies in Los Angeles before." I trailed off, not sure how to explain the rest. "Before you ended up serving coffee at 3 in the morning in San Francisco," she finished gently. "What's your name?" "Emma Watson," I said, using the surname I'd legally changed to 6 months earlier. Watson was my grandmother's maiden name, and taking it felt like claiming something that belonged to me, rather than carrying something that connected me to people who'd never valued me. "I'm Victoria Sterling," she said, extending her hand, "and I think we should talk." That conversation changed everything. Victoria owned Sterling and Associates, a boutique agency that specialized in what she called conscious commerce, helping companies align their marketing with genuine social and environmental values. She was brilliant, demanding, and completely uninterested in office politics or personal drama. She cared about results, creativity, and authenticity. She was also looking for an account coordinator who could help manage her growing client base. "I'll be honest," Victoria said as we talked until the sun came up. "The pay isn't great to start, and the work is demanding. But if you're good at what you do, if you're willing to learn and grow, this industry is exploding. The brands that get ahead of this trend will be worth billions in the next decade." I started at Sterling & Associates the following Monday. The office was a converted warehouse in Soma, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, filled with plants and vintage furniture that somehow managed to look both professional and welcoming. My colleagues were a mix of recent graduates and career changers, united by a shared belief that marketing could be a force for positive change, rather than just another way to manipulate consumers into buying things they didn't need. For the first time since leaving Los Angeles, I felt like I was building something rather than just surviving. Victoria became more than a boss. She became a mentor who saw potential in me that I was only beginning to recognize in myself. She taught me to think strategically about brand positioning, to understand the emotional drivers behind consumer behavior, to craft messages that resonated because they were true rather than just compelling. "Marketing isn't about creating desire," she told me during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "It's about connecting authentic value with people who are ready to recognize it. The best campaigns don't convince people to want something new. They help people understand that what they already want is available." Under her guidance, I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of brand storytelling. I could look at a company and see not just what they were selling, but why people should care. More importantly, I could translate that understanding into campaigns that felt honest rather than manipulative. Within a year, I was promoted to senior account manager. Within 2 years, I was leading strategy for our biggest clients. And within 3 years, Victoria offered me something I'd never expected: a partnership. "You've earned it," she said, sliding the contract across her desk. "Your work on the Evergreen Textiles campaign alone brought in enough revenue to justify the promotion. But more than that, you understand what we're building here. You believe in it." I stared at the papers that would make me a junior partner in Sterling & Associates, my name added to the letterhead, my ideas given equal weight in company decisions. It was everything I dreamed of when I graduated from college, and more than I'd dared to hope for during those first desperate months in San Francisco. "There's one condition," Victoria continued. "I want you to start thinking about your own agency. Sterling & Associates is just the beginning for you, Emma. You have the vision and the skills to build something bigger." The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Starting my own agency meant risking everything I'd built, but it also meant the possibility of creating something entirely mine, something that reflected my values, my vision, my definition of success. Over the next 2 years, I planned and saved and dreamed. I identified the gap in the market that I wanted to fill: luxury brands that were struggling to connect with environmentally conscious consumers without appearing inauthentic or opportunistic. I developed a philosophy based on what Victoria had taught me about connecting genuine value with ready audiences. And slowly, carefully, I began to reach out to potential clients. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Meridian House, a luxury hotel chain known for its exclusive properties and impeccable service, was facing a crisis. Environmental activists had targeted them for their wasteful practices, and younger consumers were choosing competitors who could demonstrate genuine commitment to sustainability. Their existing agency had proposed a greenwashing campaign, superficial changes designed to create the appearance of environmental responsibility without requiring real commitment or investment. The client was smart enough to recognize that approach would backfire spectacularly in an era of social media scrutiny and consumer skepticism. That's when someone mentioned my name, I'll never forget walking into that first meeting at Meridian House's corporate headquarters in downtown San Francisco. The conference room overlooked the bay, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Around the table sat executives who controlled a billion-dollar hospitality empire, all of them looking skeptical about the young woman who claimed she could solve their reputation crisis. "Ms. Watson," the CEO said, barely glancing up from his phone, "we've heard you specialize in authentic messaging for brands with environmental concerns. What exactly does that mean?" I took a breath and looked around the table. These were people accustomed to being sold to, accustomed agencies promising them the world in exchange for massive retainers. They expected either desperate enthusiasm or polished corporate speak. Instead, I told them the truth. "It means I'm going to help you become the company you claim to be instead of just helping you claim to be something you're not," I said. "Meridian House has the resources and infrastructure to become a genuine leader in sustainable luxury hospitality. But that's going to require real changes, significant investment, and the courage to do the right thing even when it's not the easy thing." The room went quiet. The CEO finally looked up from his phone. "And if we're not willing to make those changes," he asked, "then you should hire a different agency," I said. "Because I won't help you lie to your customers, and I won't attach my name to a campaign that's designed to fail." It was the biggest risk I'd ever taken professionally, walking away from a potential client worth millions in revenue. But I'd learned something important from Victoria, and something even more important from my experience with Madison and David. Authentic value doesn't compromise itself to accommodate people who refuse to recognize it. The room was silent for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then the CEO smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "Tell us more," he said. That meeting led to a contract worth more than I'd made in my previous 3 years combined. More importantly, it led to a partnership with a client who was genuinely committed to becoming better rather than just appearing better. Over the next 18 months, we transformed Meridian House from an environmental laggard into an industry leader, implementing everything from renewable energy systems to locally sourced organic food programs. The campaign we launched didn't hide from their past mistakes. Instead, it celebrated their commitment to doing better, documenting their journey towards sustainability in real time and inviting customers to be part of the transformation. It was honest, ambitious, and absolutely authentic. It was also wildly successful. The hospitality industry took notice. Environmental groups praised Meridian House's genuine commitment to change. Luxury travelers flocked to properties where they could indulge themselves without compromising their values. And other hotel chains began reaching out to the agency that had orchestrated the transformation. Watson & Associates was born not from desperation or circumstance, but from success that demanded expansion. Within 6 months of leaving Sterling & Associates to start my own firm, I had 12 employees and a client waiting list that stretched into the following year. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. I was leaving the office late one evening, reviewing proposals for a new sustainable resort chain, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "Saw the article about your agency in Fortune. Impressive work. Hope you're well. David." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. David Chen was my past. Emma Watson was my present. And I was just getting started. Success had a way of making the phone ring. Within 3 years of launching Watson & Associates, I had moved our headquarters to a penthouse office in the financial district, complete with panoramic views of the Golden Gate Bridge and a client roster that read like a who's who of conscious luxury brands. But success also had a way of bringing unwanted attention from people who had written you off years ago. The first call came from my mother on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing campaign proposals for a new electric vehicle startup when my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression I'd learned to recognize as trouble. "Your mother is on line 3, Sarah said carefully. "She says it's important." I hadn't spoken to Catherine Pierce in over 4 years. Not since the last time she'd called to inform me that Madison was pregnant, and that I should really make an effort to be part of the baby's life. despite what she diplomatically called our previous misunderstanding. I'd listened politely, congratulated her on becoming a grandmother, and then changed my phone number. But somehow, she'd found me again. "Emma?" My mother's voice was exactly as I remembered it, crisp and controlled with an undertone that suggested I was already disappointing her. "I hope you're well. We've been reading about your little business in the papers." Little business. Watson and Associates now employed 43 people and had been featured on the cover of Marketing Week as one of the most innovative agencies on the West Coast. We'd won industry awards, spoken at conferences, and our client revenue had hit 8 figures for the first time last quarter. But to my mother, it would always be a little business. "Hello, Mother," I said, settling back in my chair. "What can I do for you?" "We need to talk," she said. "About family matters." "About Madison." I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the old anxiety that came from being pulled back into their orbit. "Is something wrong?" "She's having some difficulties," my mother said carefully, "with David. Their marriage has been challenging. And with the children, well, it's been stressful." Children, plural. In the years since I'd left Los Angeles, Madison had apparently built the life she'd always wanted. The successful husband, the beautiful home, the perfect family that looked good in Christmas card photos. It shouldn't have surprised me that even that wasn't enough for her. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was. Despite everything, I didn't want Madison to be unhappy. I just didn't want to be responsible for fixing her happiness either. "The thing is," my mother continued, "David's business has hit some rough patches. The restaurant chain he invested in has been struggling, and their finances are quite tight. Madison mentioned that you've done well for yourself, and we thought perhaps you might be willing to help family during a difficult time." There it was. The real reason for the call. Madison needed money, and they decided I was the solution to their problem. Not because they valued me or missed me or wanted me back in their lives, but because I had become useful again. "How much?" I asked quietly. My mother sounded relieved that I was being so reasonable. "Well, they need about $200,000 to keep the house and get David's business back on track. It's really quite modest considering your success." $200,000. More than most people made in 3 years. Dismissed as modest because I could afford it. I thought about the last time my family had asked me for anything. Actually, I couldn't remember them ever asking. They'd always just taken what they wanted and assumed I'd adjust. "I see," I said. "And Madison asked you to call me?" "She's been hesitant to reach out directly," my mother admitted, "given the circumstances of your departure. But Emma, she's your sister. And David, well, despite everything that happened between you two, he's family now." Family, the word they used when they needed something from me, conspicuously absent when I needed support or understanding or basic acknowledgement of my worth. "I'll think about it," I said. "Oh, wonderful. How soon do you think you could—" "I said I'll think about it," I repeated. "I'll be in touch." I hung up before she could respond and sat staring out at the bay, watching sailboats navigate the choppy waters between San Francisco and Sausalito. My mother's call had been calculated, perfectly timed to catch me when my success was public enough to make me a viable target. They'd probably been monitoring my career through Google alerts and industry publications, waiting for the right moment to re-establish contact. The thought should have angered me, but instead I felt something closer to pity. They were exactly who they'd always been. People who saw relationships as transactions and love as something you earned through usefulness. They hadn't changed. I had. My assistant knocked again. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Alexander Sterling is here for your lunch meeting." Alexander Sterling. Even his name sounded like money, which made sense since he had more of it than most small countries. Sterling Industries was a tech conglomerate that had started with renewable energy patents and expanded into everything from sustainable manufacturing to electric aviation. Forbes estimated his net worth at somewhere north of $12 billion, but that number changed so frequently it was almost meaningless. What mattered was that he was brilliant, principled, and looking for an agency that could help his companies communicate their environmental mission without sounding like corporate propaganda. He'd requested the meeting after seeing our work with Meridian House, and I'd spent weeks preparing for what could be the biggest pitch of my career. I'd expected a typical tech CEO, brilliant but awkward, passionate about his vision but terrible at explaining it to normal humans. Instead, Alexander Sterling walked into my office and immediately challenged every assumption I'd made about billionaire entrepreneurs. He was younger than his public photos suggested, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that looked like he'd forgotten to get it cut, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to prove himself to anyone. But when he spoke, it was clear he was genuinely interested in what other people had to say. "Ms. Watson," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Thank you for making time. I know your schedule is demanding." "Thank you for considering us," I replied, then stopped myself. I'd learned from Victoria that the most successful people respected directness more than deference. Actually, let me rephrase that. "Thank you for recognizing that we're the right agency for what you're trying to accomplish." He smiled, and I noticed it reached his eyes in a way that suggested he wasn't accustomed to people being direct with him. "Confidence. I like that. Tell me why you think Sterling Industries needs Watson & Associates." I'd prepared a presentation with charts and case studies and competitive analysis. Instead, I found myself leaning forward and speaking from instinct. "Because you're tired of being misunderstood," I said. "You've built companies that could revolutionize how we approach energy, transportation, and manufacturing. But every time you try to talk about environmental responsibility, people assume you're either naive or calculating. They can't believe that someone with your resources actually cares about anything beyond profit." Alexander's expression shifted, something like surprise flickering across his features. "Go on." "Sterling Industries doesn't need marketing that makes you look good," I continued. "You need marketing that helps people understand who you actually are. Not the billionaire caricature, not the tech bro stereotype, but the person who chose to build companies that could change the world instead of just making money." We talked for 3 hours. Not about campaigns or strategies or timelines, but about purpose and authenticity and the responsibility that came with having resources most people couldn't imagine. Alexander spoke about growing up in foster care, about learning that money was just a tool, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who either wanted something from you or assumed the worst about your motivations. I found myself sharing things I'd never told a client. About building an agency from nothing, about learning to trust my own judgment, about the difference between success that came from compromise and success that came from staying true to your values. "You know," Alexander said as the afternoon light began to fade through my office windows, "I came here expecting to interview you for a job. Instead, I feel like I've been talking to someone who actually understands what I'm trying to do." "Maybe that's the same thing," I said. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "Maybe it is. The question is, are you interested in working with someone who comes with as much baggage as I do? Sterling Industries isn't just a client. We're a statement about what you believe in." I thought about my mother's phone call, about Madison's financial troubles, about the family that had never believed I was capable of anything significant. Then I looked at the man sitting across from my desk, someone who had built an empire based on principles rather than profit, and who was asking me to help him share that vision with the world. "I'm interested," I said. The Sterling Industries contract transformed Watson & Associates overnight. Not just financially, though the retainer was larger than our previous 3 biggest clients combined. But culturally, strategically, the partnership elevated everything we did. Other companies saw that Alexander Sterling had chosen us, and suddenly we were fielding calls from CEOs who had never returned our messages before. More importantly, working with Alexander challenged me to think bigger about what marketing could accomplish. He wasn't interested in incremental improvements or safe campaigns that wouldn't offend anyone. He wanted to change how people thought about business, about responsibility, about the role of wealth in solving global problems. Our first campaign launched 6 months later. Instead of focusing on Sterling Industries products, we told the story of the company's mission. We showcased the former foster kids who now held engineering degrees thanks to the Sterling Foundation's scholarship program. We documented the renewable energy projects that were bringing power to rural communities for the first time. We let Alexander speak directly to the camera about why he'd chosen to build companies that prioritized impact over profit. The response was immediate and polarizing. Environmental groups praised the authenticity of the message. Business publications called it either brilliant or naive. Social media exploded with debates about whether billionaires could be trusted to care about anything beyond their own interests. But the metric that mattered most was simpler. Applications for jobs at Sterling Industries increased by 400%. Investment in their sustainable technology funds tripled. And for the first time in his career, Alexander was being recognized not as a wealthy eccentric, but as a visionary leader. "You've changed how people see me," he told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings. "More importantly, you've helped me change how I see myself." We were sitting in the conference room at Sterling Industries headquarters, surrounded by prototypes of electric aircraft and solar panels that looked more like art installations than industrial equipment. Alexander had insisted on meeting at his office instead of mine, claiming he wanted to show me the context for everything we were trying to communicate. "I didn't change anything," I said. "I just helped people see what was already there." "Is that what you do?" he asked. "Help people see what's already there?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. "I suppose so. Most people and companies have more value than they realize. They just don't know how to show it to the world." "And what about you?" Alexander asked quietly. "Do you know your own value?" I looked at him across the conference table, this man who could buy anything he wanted but seemed genuinely interested in my answer. "I'm learning," I said. That evening, Alexander asked if I'd like to have dinner. "Not a business dinner," he clarified. "Just dinner between two people who enjoyed each other's company." I said yes before I could second-guess myself. We went to a small restaurant in North Beach that Alexander claimed served the best pasta in the city. It was the kind of place where the owner knew every customer's name, and the wine list was written on a chalkboard. Nothing about it suggested that one of the diners was worth $12 billion. "I have to ask," I said as we shared a bottle of Chianti that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Why me?" "You could work with any agency in the world. Firms with global reach, celebrity creative directors, decades of experience with clients like you." Alexander swirled his wine thoughtfully. "Have you ever noticed that the most expensive consultants always tell you what you want to hear? They've learned that challenging powerful people is bad for business. And I don't do that. You told me in our first meeting that Sterling Industries needed to stop trying to look good and start being good. You said if we weren't willing to make real changes, we should hire someone else." He smiled. "No one talks to me like that anymore." "Maybe they should," I said. "Maybe they should," he agreed. "But Emma, it's not just about business. You see people clearly. You saw what I was trying to do before I could articulate it myself." "That's rare." Over the next few months, our professional relationship evolved into something more personal. Alexander would stop by the office with coffee when he was in the neighborhood. I'd text him articles about sustainable technology that I thought he'd find interesting. We'd debate marketing strategies that turned into conversations about philosophy, about purpose, about what it meant to live authentically in a world that rewarded performance over substance. He was nothing like David, whose ambition had always felt like hunger, an endless need to acquire more status, more recognition, more proof of his own importance. Alexander's drive came from a different place, a genuine desire to solve problems that mattered. He'd already proven himself in every way that society measured success. Now he was trying to prove something to himself. "My therapist says I have savior complex," he told me one evening as we walked along the waterfront after another late dinner. "The need to fix things that are broken, to rescue people who need help." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think there's a difference between wanting to save the world and wanting to improve it," he said. "One comes from ego, the other from responsibility." "Which one drives you?" He stopped walking and turned to face me, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. "I hope it's responsibility, but sometimes I wonder if I'm just trying to prove that having money doesn't automatically make you a bad person." I thought about my family, about Madison's assumption that wealth and worth were the same thing, about my mother's casual dismissal of my success because it didn't fit her definition of impressive. "Money doesn't make you good or bad," I said. "It just makes you more of whatever you already are." "And what am I?" Alexander asked. I looked at him standing there in his perfectly tailored suit that he wore like an afterthought, this man who could buy anything but seemed to value only things that couldn't be purchased, and felt something shift inside me. Not the desperate attraction I'd felt for David, which had been based on need and insecurity, and the hope that loving someone impressive would make me impressive too. This was different, calmer, based on recognition rather than desperation. You're someone who uses power to create rather than consume, I said. Someone who asks hard questions instead of accepting easy answers. Someone who cares more about being useful than being important. Alexander stepped closer, and I could see something vulnerable in his expression. Emma, I need you to know that this isn't about business anymore. At least not for me. I know, I said quietly. I've never been involved with someone I work with, he continued. It complicates things, changes the dynamic. Everything worthwhile is complicated, I said. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. Are you sure about this? About us? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to just being colleagues. I thought about all the times I'd compromised myself for other people's comfort, all the ways I'd made myself smaller to fit into relationships that were never meant for me. Then I looked at Alexander, someone who seemed to value me more when I was fully myself rather than less. I'm sure, I said. Our first kiss happened right there on the Embarcadero, with the Bay Bridge stretching across the water behind us, and the sound of late-night traffic providing an urban symphony. It was tentative at first, then deeper, charged with months of conversation and understanding and mutual respect that had grown into something neither of us had expected. When we finally pulled apart, Alexander rested his forehead against mine. I should probably tell you that I'm falling in love with you, he said. Just falling? I asked. He laughed. Fair point. I should probably tell you that I'm completely in love with you and have been for weeks. That's better, I said, and kissed him again. The relationship that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Alexander pursued me with the same focused intensity he brought to everything he cared about, but without the possessiveness or jealousy that had characterized my past relationships. He supported my career ambitions, not because they reflected well on him, but because he genuinely wanted to see me succeed. He challenged my ideas not to diminish me, but because he respected my intelligence enough to engage with it seriously. More importantly, he saw me clearly, not as someone who could enhance his image or fulfill his needs, but as a complete person with my own dreams and fears and aspirations. When I talked about expanding Watson & Associates into international markets, he connected me with contacts who could help. When I struggled with self-doubt about taking on bigger clients, he reminded me of everything I'd already accomplished on my own. You know what I love about you? He said one morning as we had breakfast on the terrace of his Pacific Heights home, the city spread out below us like a promise. You've never once asked me for anything. Should I be asking for things? I said, teasing. No, he said seriously. That's the point. Everyone wants something from me. Money, connections, access, validation. You're the only person in my life who seems to want just me. I reached across the table and took his hand. That's because you're enough, I said. Just you, exactly as you are. 6 months later, Alexander proposed. Not with a public gesture or elaborate production, but during one of our quiet Sunday mornings, when we were reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, and existing in the comfortable silence that comes when two people truly understand each other. Emma, he said, looking up from the business section, will you marry me? I set down my coffee cup and studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the question. Are you asking because you think it's time, or because you can't imagine your life without me? The second one, he said without hesitation. Then yes, I said. He produced a ring that was exactly what I would have chosen if I'd been brave enough to voice my preferences. Not the massive solitaire that would have announced his wealth to everyone who saw it, but a vintage Art Deco design with a perfect center stone surrounded by smaller diamonds that caught the light like stars. It was elegant without being ostentatious, valuable without being vulgar. How did you know? I asked as he slipped it onto my finger. I've been paying attention, he said, to what you like, what you value, what makes you happy. I wanted the ring to reflect who you are, not who people think you should be, because you're marrying me. That attention to who I actually was, rather than who I could be molded into, felt like the greatest luxury of all. We planned a small wedding at Alexander's estate in Napa Valley, just family and close friends, in a setting that prioritized intimacy over spectacle. I chose a dress that made me feel beautiful rather than impressive, vendors who understood our vision rather than our budget, details that reflected our relationship rather than social expectations. It was everything my first wedding would have been if I'd been brave enough to trust my own instincts, instead of trying to create something that would win approval from people who were never going to value me anyway. But planning a wedding, even a small one, meant dealing with family expectations. Alexander's parents had died in a car accident when he was 15, which was partly why he'd ended up in foster care, despite coming from wealth. The relatives who could have taken him in had been more interested in fighting over his inheritance than caring for a traumatized teenager. He'd learned early that family was something you chose rather than something you were born into. My family was more complicated. You have to invite them, Alexander said when I expressed reluctance about including my parents and Madison in the guest list. Not because they deserve it, but because you'll regret it if you don't. Will I asked. Or will I regret giving them another opportunity to make my special day about their comfort? Alexander considered this seriously. What would feel right to you? Not what's expected, not what's diplomatic. What would make you proud of how you handled this? I thought about the last 4 years, about building a life and career and relationship based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. About learning to trust my own judgment, to value my own opinion, to stop seeking validation from people who were never going to offer it freely. I want to invite them, I said finally, but on my terms. They can come as guests, not as participants. They can celebrate with us if they choose to, but they don't get to have opinions about our choices or input on our decisions. And if they can't accept those boundaries, then they'll miss a beautiful wedding, I said. I called my mother 3 weeks before the ceremony. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Emma, darling," she said, her voice warm with the kind of affection she reserved for occasions when she wanted something. "We've been hoping to hear from you. Your father and I saw the engagement announcement in the Chronicle. Alexander Sterling, how wonderful. You've certainly done well for yourself." Done well for myself. As if marrying Alexander was an achievement, rather than a natural result of two people who loved each other, deciding to build a life together. "Thank you," I said. "I'm calling to invite you and Dad to the wedding. It's going to be small, just immediate family and close friends." "Of course we'll be there," my mother said quickly. "Madison and David will be so excited. And the children will love seeing their aunt get married." I took a breath. "Actually, the invitation is just for you and Dad. We're keeping the guest list very limited." There was a pause. "Emma, surely you're not still holding grudges after all these years. Madison is your sister. What happened between you and David was ancient history. They've been married for 7 years now. 7 years. David and Madison had been married longer than David and I had even known each other. Their children had never known a world where their parents weren't together, where their family hadn't been built on the foundation of my discarded dreams. It's not about grudges," I said calmly. "It's about boundaries. This is my wedding, and I want to be surrounded by people who love and support me. Madison and David are welcome to send their congratulations, but they're not invited to attend." "That's very hurtful, Emma. Very selfish." "Perhaps," I agreed. "But it's my choice to make." My mother tried several more approaches. Guilt about family unity, concerns about what people would think, suggestions that I was being unnecessarily difficult. I listened politely and held my ground. "The wedding is June 15th at 4 o'clock, I said when she'd exhausted her arguments. "I'll email you the details. I hope you and Dad will choose to be there." After I hung up, Alexander found me sitting on our couch staring out at the garden behind his house, where workers were setting up the greenhouse that would serve as our reception venue. "How did it go?" he asked, settling beside me. "About how I expected," I said. "She thinks I'm being selfish and hurtful." "Are you?" I considered the question seriously. "Maybe. But I'm also being honest about what I need to feel safe and happy on our wedding day. I've spent too many years prioritizing other people's comfort over my own well-being." Alexander took my hand, his thumb tracing over the engagement ring he'd chosen so carefully. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for uninviting my sister to my wedding?" "For knowing what you need and being brave enough to ask for it," he said. "That's harder than it sounds." 2 weeks before the wedding, Madison called me directly. I was in my office reviewing final details with our wedding planner when my assistant knocked to say that Madison Pierce Chen was on the phone, claiming it was urgent. I almost didn't take the call, but curiosity won out over caution. "Emma," Madison said, her voice carrying that familiar blend of warmth and manipulation. "I hope you're well. Mother told me about your wedding. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said carefully. "Listen, I know things have been complicated between us, but I was hoping we could talk, as sisters, about moving forward." "What did you want to discuss?" Madison sighed, and I could almost see her arranging her expression into something appropriately vulnerable. "I think I owe you an apology for how things happened with David, for how I handled the situation. We were young, and I made choices that hurt you. I've regretted that for years." The apology I'd once desperately wanted, delivered 7 years too late and with timing that suggested ulterior motives. If Madison had truly regretted her actions, she'd had plenty of opportunities to express that regret when it might have mattered. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I was hoping," Madison continued, "that we could put the past behind us. Start fresh. I'd love to be at your wedding to celebrate this new chapter in your life." "The guest list is already finalized," I said. "Surely you could make an exception for family," Madison pressed. "Emma, I know we haven't been close, but you're my sister. I want to support you." I thought about all the times Madison had claimed to support me while actively undermining my happiness. All the moments when she'd positioned herself as the helpful sister, while ensuring that I remained in her shadow. "Madison," I said quietly, "where was this desire to support me when I needed it most? When you were wearing my wedding dress and planning a life with my fiancé?" "That's different," she said quickly. "We were kids then. We didn't understand what we were doing." "We were 24, I corrected, adults making adult choices. And you understood exactly what you were doing." The line went quiet for a moment. When Madison spoke again, her voice had lost its careful warmth. "Fine." I tried to extend an olive branch, but clearly you're determined to hold on to your resentment. "I hope it makes you happy." "What makes me happy," I said, "is surrounding myself with people who value me. People who see me as more than a source of financial support or social convenience. People who choose to be in my life because they want to be, not because they need something from me." "Is that what you think?" Madison asked, and for the first time in our conversation, she sounded genuinely hurt. "That I only call when I need something?" "When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing?" I asked. "When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? When was the last time you showed interest in my life, my work, my happiness for its own sake, rather than as a way to get something you wanted?" Madison was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally she said, "You've changed, Emma. You used to be kind." "I used to be convenient," I corrected. "There's a difference." After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the city I'd chosen, thinking about the life I'd built from nothing, about the man who loved me for exactly who I was rather than who I could be molded into becoming. In 2 weeks, I would marry Alexander Sterling, surrounded by people who had chosen to be part of our celebration because they genuinely cared about our happiness. Madison and David and my parents could think whatever they wanted about my choices. Their opinions no longer had the power to shape my sense of self-worth or dictate my decisions. I was no longer the girl who had stood in her childhood bedroom watching her sister model the wedding dress she would never wear. I was a woman who had built something beautiful from the wreckage of her discarded dreams, someone who had learned to recognize her own value even when others couldn't see it. And in 2 weeks, I would marry a man who saw me more clearly than my own family ever had. The wedding was everything I'd hoped it would be, and nothing like what Madison would have planned. Simple, elegant, focused on meaning rather than spectacle. Alexander and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising to see each other clearly, to support each other's dreams, to build a partnership based on mutual respect rather than need. My parents attended, as I'd known they would. They were polite, appropriate, careful not to say anything that might cause a scene, but I could see them taking inventory, calculating the cost of everything from the flowers to the wine to the string quartet. adding up Alexander's worth and my elevated status within their social hierarchy. During the reception, my father approached me as I stood watching Alexander dance with Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who had owned the diner where I'd worked during my first months in San Francisco and who had become like a grandmother to me. "You've done very well for yourself, Emma," he said, his tone carrying approval that would have meant everything to me 8 years ago. "Thank you," I said. "Alexander seems like a good man. Successful, principled. You could have a very comfortable life together." I looked at my father, still trying to reduce my relationship to a transaction, still measuring love in terms of financial security and social advancement. "I already have a comfortable life, Dad," I said gently. "I built it myself. Alexander doesn't make me comfortable. He makes me happy." My father looked confused by the distinction, but he nodded anyway. "Well, happiness is important too, I suppose." Later that evening, as Alexander and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon in New Zealand, my mother pulled me aside. "I want you to know that we're proud of you," she said, and I could tell she was trying to be sincere. "You've accomplished more than we ever imagined you could." The backhanded compliment was so perfectly my mother that I almost smiled. Even her pride came with a reminder of their low expectations. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "And Emma," she continued, "I hope that now that you're settled, you might consider reconnecting with Madison. She's struggling right now, and families should support each other." There it was, the real purpose of her congratulations, the agenda beneath her approval. Even on my wedding day, I was being recruited to solve Madison's problems. "I'll think about it," I said. The same words I'd used about helping with Madison's financial troubles 2 years earlier. My mother smiled, interpreting my response as agreement rather than dismissal. As Alexander and I drove away from the reception, heading to the airport for our flight to Auckland, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because my family had finally accepted me, but because I no longer needed them to. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked as we settled into our seats in first class, the lights of San Francisco falling away beneath us. "Just one," I said. He looked concerned. "What?" "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the right people will see your value without you having to prove it to them." Alexander smiled and took my hand, his wedding ring catching the cabin lights. "Better late than never," he said. As our plane climbed toward cruising altitude, carrying us toward 2 weeks in New Zealand and then back to a life built on mutual respect and genuine love, I thought about the girl I'd been 8 years ago. Standing in her childhood bedroom, watching her sister wear the wedding dress she'd never get to use, believing that her worth was determined by other people's recognition of it. That girl would never have imagined this life, this love, this sense of absolute certainty about her own value. She would never have believed that losing everything she thought she wanted could lead to gaining everything she actually needed. But perhaps that was the point. Sometimes you had to lose the life you'd planned in order to find the life you were meant to live. Sometimes the best thing that could happen to you was discovering that the people you'd been trying to please were never going to value you anyway. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you met someone who saw you clearly from the beginning and chose to love exactly what they saw. Madison had taken my wedding dress and my fiancé, thinking she was stealing my future. Instead, she had freed me to create a better one. A future based on authenticity rather than compromise. On partnership rather than performance. On being seen rather than being useful. It was, I realized as Alexander squeezed my hand and the plane carried us toward our new life together, the greatest gift she could have given me. Even if she'd never intended it that way. Marriage to Alexander brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Not just the obvious ones like living in a Pacific Heights mansion with a view that made tourists stop and stare, or having access to resources that could solve almost any problem money could touch. The real changes were subtler, more profound. I found myself moving through the world with a different kind of confidence. The security that came from being truly seen and valued by someone whose opinion mattered to me. Watson and Associates expanded into international markets within our first year as a married couple. We opened offices in London and Sydney, hired teams of brilliant strategists who shared our vision of marketing as a force for positive change. Alexander's connections opened doors, but it was our work that kept them open. We weren't riding on his reputation, we were building our own. The industry took notice. Marketing Week named me one of their 40 under 40. Harvard Business School invited me to guest lecture on authentic brand storytelling. The New York Times profiled Watson and Associates as an example of how smaller agencies were challenging the traditional advertising giants by prioritizing purpose over profit. But success at this level came with visibility I hadn't expected. My name appeared in gossip columns alongside Alexander's, speculation about our relationship, our lifestyle, our influence in both business and social circles. Photographers captured us at charity galas and art gallery openings, creating a public narrative about our marriage that bore little resemblance to our actual life together. The attention reached Los Angeles, of course. Everything did eventually. I was in the London office, working late on a campaign for a sustainable fashion startup, when my assistant in San Francisco called with an unusual request. "Emma, I have a journalist from Los Angeles magazine on the phone," Sarah said, her voice careful in a way that suggested trouble. "She says she's working on a feature about successful women who've overcome family betrayal. She specifically mentioned your sister and wants to discuss your journey from that situation to where you are now." I felt my stomach tighten. Did she say how she heard about Madison? No, but she seems to know quite a bit about what happened 8 years ago. She mentioned the wedding dress specifically. Someone had talked, the question was who. My parents were too image-conscious to air family drama publicly. Alexander would never betray my confidence. That left Madison herself, or someone close enough to the situation to know details that hadn't been public knowledge. "Tell her I'm not available for comment," I said. "And Sarah, if any other journalists call asking about my family history, please forward them directly to our legal team." But I knew the damage was already done. Once one publication started digging into a story, others would follow. The narrative of betrayal and redemption was too compelling for the media to ignore, especially when it involved someone married to Alexander Sterling. The article appeared 3 weeks later. "From Heartbreak to Billions: How Emma Watson Built an Empire After Her Sister Stole Her Groom," ran with a photo of me and Alexander at a recent fundraiser, looking elegant and successful. The piece was surprisingly sympathetic, portraying me as someone who had transformed personal devastation into professional triumph. But it also included quotes from unnamed sources close to the Pierce family, describing Madison's current struggles with her marriage and finances, David's failed business ventures, and the growing tension between the siblings who had once been inseparable. I read the article twice, then called Alexander. "Have you seen it?" I asked without preamble when he answered. "Just finished reading it," he said. "How are you feeling?" I was sitting in my London hotel room, looking out at the Thames, trying to process the strange experience of seeing my private pain transformed into public entertainment. "Exposed," I said finally, like someone opened a door I thought I'd locked. "Do you want to come home?" Alexander asked. "I can have the jet ready in an hour." The offer was tempting, but running wouldn't solve anything. "No, I need to finish the campaign launch here." "But Alexander, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Other publications will pick up the story. Social media will have opinions. Are you prepared for that?" "Emma," his voice was steady, reassuring, "I married you knowing exactly who you are and where you came from. A magazine article doesn't change anything about us." That evening, I called my parents. Not because I owed them an explanation, but because I wanted to hear their response to the article from them directly, rather than through third-party speculation. My mother answered with her usual brisk efficiency. "Emma, darling, we've been expecting your call, that dreadful article in Los Angeles magazine. We had no idea journalists were asking questions about family matters." "Did either of you speak to the reporter?" I asked. "Of course not," my mother said, sounding genuinely offended. "We would never discuss private family business with strangers. Though I must say, some of the details suggest the information came from someone with intimate knowledge of the situation." Madison. The realization hit me with the force of certainty. Madison had talked to the press, either directly or through someone she'd confided in. The question was why. "How is Madison handling the attention?" I asked. My mother's pause told me everything I needed to know. She's upset, naturally. The article paints her in a very unflattering light. David is furious about the implications for his reputation. They're considering legal action. Legal action against whom? The magazine had been careful to avoid direct accusations, focusing instead on the human interest angle of my success story. If Madison and David were considering lawsuits, it suggested they were more concerned about public perception than actual libel. "Mother," I said carefully, "I want you to know that I had nothing to do with this article. I refuse to be interviewed and have no intention of discussing family matters publicly." "We never thought you did," my mother said quickly. "But Emma, perhaps now would be a good time to reach out to Madison directly. She's feeling quite vulnerable, and a gesture of support from you might help heal old wounds." Even now, even after Madison had apparently fed information to the press that resulted in a public examination of our family's private pain, my mother was asking me to be the one to extend olive branches and offer comfort. "I'll consider it," I said, using my standard response to requests I had no intention of fulfilling. The article had consequences beyond family drama. Within days of its publication, my phone was ringing with interview requests from business publications wanting to explore the connection between personal resilience and professional success. 3 different publishers reached out about potential book deals. A television producer pitched a documentary about women who had transformed personal betrayal into business triumph. I declined them all. My story belonged to me, not to the entertainment industry's appetite for compelling narratives. But I couldn't control the secondary coverage. Bloggers dissected every detail of the original article. Social media users debated whether Madison's actions had been justified, whether I was wrong to exclude her from my wedding, whether my success was somehow tainted by family dysfunction. The attention reached Madison and David directly. Their social media accounts, once filled with carefully curated family photos and lifestyle content, went private. David's restaurant consulting business, already struggling, according to the article, reportedly lost several clients who didn't want to be associated with the negative publicity. 3 weeks after the Los Angeles Magazine piece ran, Madison called me. I was in my San Francisco office, reviewing proposals for a new client, when Sarah knocked on my door with an expression I'd come to recognize as significant news. "Your sister is online too," she said. "She sounds upset." I considered not taking the goose call, but curiosity won out over caution. Madison's voice, when I answered, was strained, lacking the polished confidence I remembered. "Emma, we need to talk," she said without preamble, "about this article, about what's happening to our family because of it." "What would you like to discuss?" I asked carefully. "I want you to know that I didn't speak to that reporter," Madison said. "Whatever they wrote, however they got their information, it didn't come from me." The denial was too quick, too emphatic to be entirely truthful. "Who do you think talked to them?" "I don't know," Madison said, but her voice wavered slightly. "Maybe someone who knew us in college, or one of David's business associates. The point is, this article is destroying our lives. David's lost 3 clients this week. The children are asking questions about why strangers are talking about our family online." Children. Madison's twins were 7 now, old enough to understand that their family was being discussed in ways that weren't entirely flattering. Whatever anger I felt toward Madison and David, I didn't want their children to suffer for their parents' choices. "I'm sorry the children are being affected," I said sincerely. "Then help us," Madison said, her voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard before. "Make a public statement supporting me. Tell people that we've reconciled, that the past is behind us. Your word carries weight now. People will listen to you." There it was. The real reason for her call. Not to apologize for whatever role she'd played in the article's creation, but to ask me to use my public platform to rehabilitate her image. "Madison," I said quietly, "have we reconciled? Is the past behind us?" "We could be," she said quickly. "We could put everything behind us and move forward as sisters, as family." "And what would that look like?" I asked. "This reconciliation you're proposing?" Madison was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her calculating her response. "We could have lunch, she said finally. Somewhere public, where photographers might see us together. Show the world that we're a united family. A photo opportunity. Not a genuine desire to repair our relationship, but a strategic move to improve her public image. The suggestion was so perfectly Madison that I almost admired its audacity. I see, I said. And after this public lunch, what then? Do we pretend that 8 years of separation never happened? Do we act like the circumstances that created that separation have somehow been resolved? Emma, I was 24 years old when I married David, Madison said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. We were both young and stupid and didn't handle things well. But that was almost a decade ago. Don't you think it's time to forgive and move on? Forgive and move on. The same phrase people always used when they wanted you to absorb the consequences of their actions without requiring them to actually change or make amends. Madison, I said, forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I forgave you years ago, not because you earned it, but because carrying anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that nothing happened, or that we can go back to being sisters without addressing what went wrong between us. Then what do you want? Madison asked, frustration creeping into her voice. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry for how things happened with David. I'm sorry for taking your dress. I'm sorry for hurting you. There. Is that enough? The apology I'd once desperately wanted, delivered like a business transaction. Sorry for the inconvenience. Sorry for the misunderstanding. Sorry for the unfortunate series of events that had somehow just happened rather than been chosen. Madison, I said gently, that's not an apology, that's a negotiation tactic. What's the difference? An apology acknowledges specific harm and takes responsibility for choices made. What you just offered was a list of regrets about outcomes, not accountability for decisions. Madison was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it in years. I don't know how to do this, Emma, she said. I don't know how to apologize in a way that you'll accept. I don't know how to fix what I broke between us. For the first time in our conversation, she sounded genuinely uncertain rather than strategically manipulative. It was a glimpse of the sister I remembered from childhood, before competition and comparison had poisoned everything between us. Start by telling me why you did it, I said. Not the surface reasons about being young or falling in love. The real reasons. Why you chose to pursue David when you knew it would devastate me. Another long pause. Because I could, Madison said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Because he was attracted to me, and I was used to getting what I wanted. Because I'd always been the golden child, and it felt natural that he would choose me over you. The honesty was brutal and refreshing in equal measure. No romantic justification about true love or destiny, just the raw acknowledgement of entitlement and selfishness. And the dress? I asked. I wanted to see what it felt like, she admitted. To wear something that was meant to be yours, to imagine myself in the life you'd planned. I was curious about what I was taking from you. The cruelty of that admission took my breath away, not just the action itself, but the calculated curiosity behind it. Madison hadn't taken my dress in a moment of passion or confusion. She'd taken it to experience the pleasure of claiming something that belonged to me. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For finally telling me the truth. Madison seemed to interpret my thanks as forgiveness, because her voice brightened slightly. So we can move forward? You'll help me with the publicity situation? No, I said gently. I won't be making any public statements about our relationship. I won't be posing for photographs or giving interviews about family reconciliation. But you just said you appreciated my honesty, Madison protested. I do appreciate it. But honesty doesn't erase consequences, Madison. You made choices that hurt me deeply, and now you're facing the natural results of those choices becoming public knowledge. That's not my responsibility to fix. So that's it? Madison's voice turned hard again. You're just gonna let me suffer because of something that happened 8 years ago? I'm not letting you do anything, I corrected. I'm declining to rescue you from the consequences of your own actions. There is a difference. You've changed, Madison said. and there was something like wonder in her voice. The Emma I knew would have done anything to avoid family conflict. She would have helped me regardless of what I'd done. "You're right," I agreed. "I have changed. I've learned that helping people avoid the natural consequences of their choices isn't actually helping them. It's enabling them." "And what about family loyalty?" Madison asked. "What about supporting each other through difficult times?" "Madison," I said, "where was family loyalty when you were pursuing my fiancé? Where was support when I needed it most? You're asking me to provide something you've never offered in return." The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, Madison spoke, her voice defeated. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "My marriage is falling apart, David's business is failing, and now everyone knows our personal business. I thought maybe if we could present a united front, if people saw that you'd forgiven me, it might help repair our reputation." "Madison," I said softly, "your reputation isn't my responsibility. Neither is your marriage or David's business. Those are your challenges to solve, your consequences to manage." "But we're family," she said, one last desperate appeal to obligation and guilt. "Yes," I agreed, "we are. And maybe someday we can figure out what that means for two people who've hurt each other as much as we have. But it's not going to start with me solving your publicity problems or pretending that our relationship is something it isn't." After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the city where I'd built a life based on authenticity rather than convenience, surrounded by people who valued me for who I actually was rather than what I could provide. Madison was facing the natural consequences of choices she'd made years ago, choices that were only now becoming public knowledge. Part of me felt sorry for her children, who were innocent bystanders in their parents' drama. But I felt no obligation to shield Madison and David from accountability for their own actions. They had gambled that their behavior would never become public, that they could build a life on the foundation of someone else's discarded dreams without ever facing judgment for how that foundation had been laid. Now that gamble had failed, and they wanted me to help them avoid paying the stakes they'd agreed to. I wouldn't do it. Not because I was cruel or vindictive, but because I'd learned that protecting people from the consequences of their choices wasn't kindness. It was enablement that prevented growth and accountability. Alexander found me there an hour later, still staring out at the city lights. He didn't ask what Madison had wanted or what we'd discussed. He simply came and stood behind my chair, his hands resting on my shoulders in a gesture of quiet support. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I finally understand the difference between being family and being used by family," I said. "And what's the difference?" I leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Family supports each other through consequences. Being used means being expected to prevent consequences for other people's choices. Alexander's hands tightened slightly on my shoulders. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For refusing to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm." That night, as we lay in bed in the home we'd built together, I thought about the girl I'd been 8 years ago. The one who would have done anything to avoid family conflict, who would have absorbed any amount of pain to maintain the illusion of harmony. That girl would have agreed to Madison's request. She would have posed for photographs and given interviews, and let herself be used as a prop in someone else's reputation rehabilitation campaign. She would have prioritized other people's comfort over her own integrity. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a woman who had learned to value herself, to set boundaries, to distinguish between kindness and convenience. I was someone who understood that real love didn't require you to diminish yourself to make others feel better. And tomorrow, I would wake up and continue building a life based on those principles, regardless of what my family thought about my choices. The stand I'd taken wasn't about punishing Madison or David. It was about protecting the person I'd become and the relationships I'd built on genuine foundation. It was about refusing to compromise my integrity for other people's convenience. It was about finally learning that my worth wasn't determined by my usefulness to people who had never valued me in the first place. The months following my refusal to help Madison repair her public image brought a clarity I hadn't expected. Without the constant emotional drain of family obligations and guilt, Watson and Associates flourished in ways that surprised even me. We landed contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies seeking to overhaul their environmental messaging, opened a 4th international office in Tokyo, and expanded our team to include some of the most innovative minds in sustainable marketing. Alexander watched my professional growth with the kind of pride that had nothing to do with his own success. He celebrated my wins without taking credit, supported my decisions without trying to influence them, and gave me space to become the leader I was meant to be without the shadow of his wealth affecting how people perceived my accomplishments. "You know what I love about watching you work?" he said one evening as we shared dinner on the terrace of our home, the Golden Gate Bridge glowing in the distance. "You never compromise your vision to make other people comfortable, even when it would be easier." I thought about all the times I'd been tempted to soften my message, to make our campaigns more palatable to clients who wanted the appearance of environmental responsibility without the commitment to real change. Victoria taught me early that authenticity isn't negotiable. The moment you start compromising your core values for convenience, you stop being who you are. "Is that why you wouldn't help Madison?" Alexander asked gently. "Because it would have compromised who you've become?" I considered the question, swirling my wine as I watched seagulls dive into the bay below. "Partly, but also because helping her would have required me to participate in a lie. To pretend our relationship was something it wasn't. To endorse a narrative that painted her as a victim of circumstances rather than someone who made deliberate choices." Alexander nodded. "And you're not interested in managing other people's stories anymore?" "No," I said firmly. "I spent too many years letting other people write my story for me. I won't do that again, and I won't help others avoid writing their own." That philosophy served me well as Watson and Associates continued to grow. We attracted clients who valued honest communication over spin, companies genuinely committed to positive change rather than those seeking to greenwash their images. Our reputation for integrity became our greatest asset, setting us apart in an industry often criticized for prioritizing profit over principle. The success brought opportunities I'd never imagined. Harvard Business School offered me a position as a visiting professor. The United Nations invited me to consult on their global sustainability communication strategy. Publishers competed to sign me for a book about authentic leadership in the digital age. I accepted the UN consulting role and declined the others, not because they weren't appealing, but because I'd learned to distinguish between opportunities that aligned with my goals and those that were simply flattering distractions. "You're becoming very selective," Alexander observed as I turned down yet another high-profile speaking engagement. "I'm becoming clear about what matters to me," I corrected. "There's a difference between being busy and being effective, between being visible and being impactful." The UN project took me to Geneva for 3 months, working with delegations from around the world to develop messaging frameworks for climate action initiatives. The work was challenging, intellectually stimulating, and completely removed from the personal drama that had dominated headlines months earlier. It was in Geneva that I received the call that would change everything. I was in my hotel room, reviewing draft materials for the next day's presentation to the Environmental Council, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Los Angeles area code. "Emma Sterling?" The voice was professional, unfamiliar. I'd kept Watson as my professional name, but the caller had used Alexander's surname, which meant they knew about my personal life rather than just my business identity. "This is Emma Watson," I corrected. "How can I help you?" "Ms. Watson, I'm Jennifer Rodriguez from Chen & Associates Legal Services. I'm calling regarding your sister Madison Pierce Chen and her pending divorce proceedings." My stomach dropped. Madison was getting divorced. The marriage she'd stolen from me, built on the foundation of my discarded dreams, was ending after 8 years. "I'm not sure why you're calling me," I said carefully. "I'm not involved in my sister's personal affairs." "Actually, ma'am, that's why I'm reaching out. Mrs. Chen has listed you as a potential character witness in the proceedings. She's claiming that your recent success has inspired her to pursue her own independence, and she'd like you to testify to the strength of your sibling relationship." I sat down heavily on the hotel room's desk chair. Even in divorce, Madison was trying to use me as a prop in her narrative, trying to rewrite our relationship history to serve her legal strategy. When are these proceedings scheduled? I asked. The divorce mediation is set for next month in Los Angeles. Mrs. Chen was hoping you might be available to provide a statement about her character and your family's support for her decision to end an unhappy marriage. An unhappy marriage. Madison was positioning herself as the victim of circumstances, rather than someone whose choices had led to predictable consequences. And she wanted me to validate that narrative publicly, in legal proceedings that would become part of the public record. I'll need to review this request with my own legal team, I said. Can you send me the formal documentation? Of course. And Ms. Watson, I should mention that Mrs. Chen specifically asked me to tell you that she hopes you'll remember that family supports family, especially during difficult transitions. Family supports family. The same manipulation tactic Madison had used when asking me to repair her reputation after the magazine article. The same guilt-based appeal that had worked on me for so many years. I'll be in touch, I said, and hung up. I immediately called Alexander, who listened without interruption as I explained the situation. What do you want to do? He asked when I finished. I want to fly to Los Angeles and find out what's really happening, I said. Not Madison's version, or David's version, but the truth. I'll arrange the jet, Alexander said. When do you want to leave? Tomorrow. But Alexander, this could get messy. If I refuse to help Madison again, if this becomes another public family drama, it could affect you too. Your reputation, your business relationships. Emma, Alexander's voice was steady, certain. I married you knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. I'm not going to start asking you to compromise your integrity now. That certainty, that unwavering support for my judgment, meant more to me than any gesture of romantic love could have. Alexander valued my character enough to trust it completely, even when supporting it might cost him. The flight to Los Angeles felt like traveling backward through time. As the plane descended over the sprawling city where I'd once planned a very different life, I thought about the last time I'd been here. My wedding to Alexander had taken place in Napa Valley, deliberately distant from the emotional landscape of my childhood. This was my first time back in 8 years. I'd arranged to stay at the Four Seasons rather than impose on anyone for accommodations. Not that there was anyone to impose on. My relationship with my parents had remained cordial but distant, and I had no other close connections in the city that had once been home. The hotel room overlooked Century City, all glass towers and perfectly manicured landscaping. I stood at the window looking down at the traffic patterns that had once been as familiar as my own heartbeat, feeling like a stranger visiting a place I'd once known intimately. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. Heard you're in town. Can we meet? Please. It's important. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., hotel bar at the Four Seasons. Her reply came immediately. Thank you. I know this is hard for both of us. Hard for both of us. As if my presence here was somehow as emotionally charged for me as her divorce was for her. As if we were equals in this situation, rather than me being recruited to help solve problems I hadn't created. I spent that evening walking through Beverly Hills, revisiting places that had been significant during my time with David. The restaurant where he'd proposed, the boutique where I'd bought my going-away outfit for our planned honeymoon, the coffee shop where we'd spent Sunday mornings reading the paper and planning our future together. None of it hurt the way I'd expected it to. The emotional charge that had once made these locations significant had faded, leaving behind only mild curiosity about the girl I'd been when these places had mattered to me. It was like looking at photographs of someone else's life, interesting but not personally meaningful. The next day, I arrived at the hotel bar 15 minutes early and chose a table that offered privacy without isolation. Madison arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. She'd always been fashionably late to everything. A small power play that established her importance. She looked different. Thinner, more fragile somehow, with lines around her eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. Her hair was shorter, less perfectly styled than I remembered. She was still beautiful, still carried herself with innate elegance, but the confidence that had once radiated from her seemed dimmed. Emma, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted. But I wanted to hear what you had to say before making any decisions about the legal proceedings. Madison's expression tightened slightly. So you know about the divorce. Your lawyer called me in Geneva. She said you wanted me to provide character testimony. I hoped you might, Madison said carefully. The proceedings have been more contentious than I expected. David is fighting for primary custody of the twins, claiming I'm emotionally unstable. He is using our financial problems and the negative publicity from that magazine article as evidence that I can't provide a stable environment. I felt a flicker of sympathy for the children caught in the middle of their parents' conflict. I'm sorry the twins are being affected by this. They're the only thing that matters to me now, Madison said, and for the first time in our conversation, she sounded completely sincere. Emma, I know I have no right to ask for your help. I know I've made terrible choices, hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But I'm asking anyway, because my children need their mother. It was a compelling argument, one that tugged at my protective instincts. But I'd learned to be suspicious of emotional appeals that came without context or accountability. Tell me what happened to your marriage, I said. The real story, not the version your lawyer is crafting for the proceedings. Madison was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table between us. It was never what I thought it would be, she said finally. David and I, we were always competing with each other rather than building something together. Everything was about image, about maintaining appearances, about proving we were successful and happy and perfect. And you weren't? We were miserable, Madison admitted. But we were miserable, in expensive clothes, in a beautiful house, with careers that looked impressive from the outside. For a long time, that felt like enough. I waited, sensing there was more. The financial problems started about 3 years ago, Madison continued. David made some poor investment decisions, borrowed against the house to fund business ventures that failed. But instead of acknowledging the problems, we kept spending as if everything was fine. Kept up the lifestyle we couldn't afford, because admitting we were struggling felt like admitting we'd failed. When did you realize the marriage was over? Madison's smile was bitter. When I found out David was having an affair with his business partner's wife. Apparently our relationship had run its course, and he'd found someone new to provide the excitement and validation he needed. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. David had left Madison for another woman, just as he'd left me for Madison 8 years earlier, history repeating itself with perfect symmetry. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Being betrayed by someone you trusted is devastating, no matter what the circumstances. The thing is, Madison said, looking directly at me for the first time since she'd arrived, when I found out about David's affair, the first thing I thought about was you, about how you must have felt when you discovered what we'd done. I finally understood the pain I'd caused you. It was the closest thing to a genuine apology she'd ever offered, and I appreciated the recognition it represented. But understanding the harm you've caused isn't the same as taking responsibility for it. What do you want from me, Madison? I asked gently. Specifically in terms of the divorce proceedings? David's lawyers are painting me as a selfish, unstable person who destroys relationships for personal gain, she said. They're using our history, what happened with you and David, as evidence of a pattern of behavior. If you could testify that we've reconciled, that you don't see me as the villain in our family story, it would undermine their character assassination. There it was. Madison wanted me to revise history, to pretend our relationship was healthy when it wasn't, to provide cover for her legal strategy by misrepresenting the truth about our past. Madison, I said carefully, I can't testify that we've reconciled when we haven't. I can't claim to have a relationship with you that doesn't exist. But we could have a relationship, Madison said quickly. We could start rebuilding what we lost. I'm different now, Emma. This divorce, losing David, facing the possibility of losing my children, it's changed me. I understand things I didn't before. What kinds of things? That taking what you want without considering the cost to others doesn't actually make you happy, Madison said. That building a life on someone else's foundation is unstable. that real success comes from creating something yourself, not from claiming something that belongs to someone else. The insights were profound and accurate, exactly the kind of growth that genuine adversity could produce. But insight wasn't the same as transformation, and transformation wasn't the same as making amends. I believe you've learned those things, I said. But Madison, learning from your mistakes doesn't erase the impact they had on other people, and it doesn't create an obligation for those people to help you manage the consequences. Madison's expression hardened slightly. So you won't help me. I won't lie in legal proceedings, I clarified. I won't misrepresent our relationship or pretend it's something it isn't. But Madison, there might be other ways I can support you that don't require me to compromise my integrity. Such as? I thought about the children involved, about the importance of stability in their lives, regardless of their parents' failures. I could provide a character reference that focuses on your potential as a mother, without commenting on our personal relationship. I could speak to your intelligence, your capability, your devotion to your children's welfare. Madison considered this. Would you mention our history at all? Only if directly asked, and only truthfully. I wouldn't volunteer information about our past conflicts, but I wouldn't deny them if questioned. David's lawyers will definitely ask about what happened 8 years ago, Madison said. They'll want you to confirm their narrative about my character. Then I'll tell the truth, I said. That you made choices that hurt me deeply, but that those choices don't necessarily reflect your capacity as a parent. That people can be flawed partners while still being devoted mothers. It wasn't the unqualified endorsement Madison had hoped for, but it was more support than I'd offered her in 8 years. And it was honest, which mattered more to me than strategic value. Why? Madison asked quietly. Why would you help me at all, given everything I've done? I thought about my answer carefully. Because your children deserve a mother who's present and stable, regardless of what their father and I might think about your past choices. Because being a good parent is separate from being a good sister or wife. And because I believe people can change, even if I don't think our relationship can go back to what it was before. Madison's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw not the polished, manipulative woman who had taken my dress and my fiancé, but the vulnerable person underneath who was genuinely afraid of losing her children. Thank you, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your help. This isn't about what you deserve, I said. It's about what's right for your children, and what I can live with. We finished our drinks in relative silence, both of us processing the complexity of family relationships that couldn't be easily categorized as healthy or unhealthy, supportive or toxic. Madison was still the person who had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, but she was also a mother facing the possibility of losing custody of her children, and that reality transcended our personal history. As we prepared to leave, Madison hesitated. Emma, can I ask you something personal? I nodded. Are you happy? Really, genuinely happy with the life you've built? The question surprised me with its directness. Yes, I said, without hesitation. I'm happy in ways I didn't know were possible when I was 24. I'm glad, Madison said, and something in her voice suggested she meant it. I know this sounds strange, but I think leaving you might have been the best thing David ever did for you. Not because I'm glad I hurt you, but because it freed you to become who you were meant to be. It was an observation that held more truth than I was comfortable acknowledging. If David hadn't left me, if Madison hadn't taken him, I might never have moved to San Francisco, never have met Victoria, never have built Watson and Associates, never have met Alexander. My devastation had been real and profound, but it had also been the catalyst for everything good in my current life. Maybe, I said carefully, but Madison, that doesn't justify what you did. It just means I was able to create something positive from the wreckage. I know, she said. I just wanted you to know that I can see what you've accomplished, and I'm proud of you, even if I don't have the right to be. As I watched Madison leave the hotel bar, walking with less confidence than she'd entered with, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sympathy for the genuine fear in her eyes when she spoke about her children, satisfaction at finally receiving acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused, and a deep appreciation for the journey that had brought me to this moment. I was no longer the woman who needed Madison's approval or validation. I was no longer someone who could be manipulated by appeals to family loyalty or guilt about abandoning people who had never supported me. I was someone who could offer help from a position of strength rather than need, someone who could make decisions based on principle rather than emotion. The girl who had stood in her childhood bedroom 8 years ago, watching her sister model the wedding dress she would never wear, had believed that her worth was determined by other people's recognition of it. The woman sitting in this hotel bar understood that worth was inherent, that it existed independently of other people's ability to see it. Madison had taken my dress and my fiancé, thinking she was stealing my future. Instead, she had freed me to create a better one. A future based on authenticity rather than approval, on partnership rather than performance, on building something valuable rather than claiming something that belonged to someone else. And now, 8 years later, I was in a position to offer help not because I owed it to her, but because I could afford to be generous without compromising myself. It was perhaps the most profound measure of how completely my life had transformed. The next morning, I called Madison's lawyer and agreed to provide limited character testimony focused on her parenting capabilities. I would tell the truth about our history if asked, but I would also speak honestly about her intelligence, her devotion to her children, and her capacity for growth. It wasn't the unconditional support Madison had hoped for, but it was more than David's legal team expected from the sister he had abandoned. And it was exactly the kind of principled compromise that allowed me to help without sacrificing my integrity. As my plane lifted off from LAX that afternoon, carrying me back to Geneva and the UN project that represented everything I'd built from nothing, I thought about the strange circularity of life. Madison was facing the consequences of choices that had once devastated me. David was losing his family just as he had once discarded mine. And I was flying back to a life of purpose and love that neither of them had believed I was capable of creating. The symmetry was almost poetic, but more than that, it was proof that authenticity and integrity, even when they required sacrifice in the short term, created foundations that could support anything in the long term. I was no longer the girl who had been left behind. I was the woman who had chosen to leave, and in leaving, had found everything she'd never known she wanted. The divorce mediation took place in a sterile conference room on the 32nd floor of a Century City high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles, but the tension in the room made it impossible to appreciate the scenery. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt that conveyed professionalism without ostentation. Madison sat at one end of the polished table, flanked by her attorney and a court-appointed child advocate. She looked composed but fragile, her hands folded carefully in her lap. David occupied the opposite end with his legal team, appearing confident in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of our engagement photos. When I entered the room, David's expression shifted from surprise to something harder to define. Recognition, perhaps, mixed with calculation, and what might have been regret. He looked older, softer around the edges, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and disappointment. "Ms. Watson," the mediator said, consulting her notes, "thank you for joining us today. I understand you're here to provide character testimony regarding Mrs. Chen's fitness as a parent." I took my seat at the neutral zone in the middle of the table, equidistant from both parties. "That's correct." David's attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Watson, before we begin, I'd like to establish your relationship with the parties involved. You were previously engaged to Mr. Chen, is that correct?" "Yes," I said simply. "And that engagement ended when Mr. Chen began a relationship with your sister, who is now Mrs. Chen?" "Yes." "How would you characterize your current relationship with your sister?" I chose my words carefully. "We have limited contact. We've spoken occasionally over the years, but we don't have a close personal relationship." Madison's attorney interjected. "But you're here today to support her custody petition despite this distance?" "I'm here to provide honest testimony about her capabilities as a mother," I corrected. "Which I believe is separate from our personal relationship." The mediator nodded approvingly. "Ms. Watson, in your observation, how would you describe Mrs. Chen's relationship with her children?" I thought about the glimpses I'd had of Madison with her twins during our recent conversations, the genuine fear in her voice when she spoke about losing them. From what I've observed, she's deeply devoted to her children's welfare. She speaks about them with obvious love and concern. Her primary focus throughout this process has been ensuring their stability and happiness. And in terms of her character generally, Madison is intelligent, resourceful, and capable of significant personal growth. She's made mistakes in her personal relationships, but I've seen no evidence that those mistakes extend to her parenting. David's attorney seized on my phrasing. You mentioned mistakes in personal relationships. Can you elaborate on what you mean? I felt the room's attention sharpen. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for. The chance to relitigate old wounds in service of current legal strategy. 8 years ago, Madison and David began a relationship while he was engaged to me, I said calmly. The way they handled that situation caused significant personal pain. However, I don't believe that past behavior necessarily reflects Madison's capacity as a mother. But it does reflect a pattern of decision-making that prioritizes personal desires over consideration for others, doesn't it? David's attorney pressed. It reflects choices made by two young adults in a complicated emotional situation, I said. People are capable of growth and change, especially when they become parents. Madison's attorney looked encouraged. Ms. Watson, have you observed any evidence of this growth you're describing? I glanced at Madison, who was watching me with an expression of careful hope. Yes, Madison has demonstrated genuine remorse for past actions and showed insight into how those actions affected others. She's acknowledged responsibility for her choices rather than making excuses. That suggests emotional maturity that would serve her well as a parent. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, each side trying to use my testimony to support their narrative. I answered honestly but carefully, neither endorsing Madison unconditionally nor providing ammunition for David's character assassination strategy. When the session concluded, I gathered my things quickly, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of old resentments and legal maneuvering. But as I waited for the elevator, David approached me. Emma, he said, his voice softer than it had been during the proceedings. Could we talk for a moment? Privately? I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes. We stepped into an empty conference room down the hall. David closed the door and turned to face me, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. I know I have no right to ask, he began, but I need to understand why you helped her. After everything we did to you. I studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or calculation, but found only genuine confusion. I helped because those children deserve stability, and because Madison's fitness as a mother isn't determined by her history as a sister or wife. But she destroyed your life, David said. We destroyed your life. I felt a moment of clarity so profound it was almost startling. No, David, you ended a relationship and changed my plans, but you didn't destroy my life. If anything, you freed me to build a better one. He looked skeptical. You can't mean that. I do, I said with complete sincerity. 8 years ago, I thought losing you was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I understand it was the best thing. You and Madison did me an enormous favor, even if that wasn't your intention. David's expression shifted, something like wonder replacing confusion. You really have moved on. I've moved forward, I corrected. There's a difference. Moving on suggests forgetting or dismissing what happened. Moving forward means learning from it and building something better. And you've built something better? I thought about Alexander, about Watson and Associates, about the life of purpose and authenticity I'd created from the ashes of my old dreams. I've built something true, I said. Something based on who I actually am, rather than who I thought I should be to make other people happy. David was quiet for a long moment. I saw the articles about your success, your marriage to Alexander Sterling. I'll admit I wondered if you'd done it partly to show us what we'd lost. The suggestion might have offended me once, the implication that my achievements were motivated by revenge rather than ambition. Now it simply seemed sad, this assumption that success was always about proving something to other people, rather than fulfilling your own potential. David, I said gently, I built my life for me. Not to impress you, not to punish you, not to prove anything to anyone. I built it because I finally learned what I actually wanted, as opposed to what I thought I was supposed to want. And what did you want? To be valued for who I am, rather than what I can provide. To create something meaningful rather than just accumulate things that look impressive. To be in a partnership based on mutual respect rather than convenience or status. David nodded slowly. Madison mentioned that you're happy. Really happy. I am. I'm glad, he said, and something in his voice suggested he meant it. Emma, I know apologies are inadequate, but I am sorry for how we handled things. You deserved better than what we gave you. It was the apology I'd waited 8 years to hear, delivered in a conference room during his divorce proceedings from the woman he'd left me for. The timing was almost comically perfect in its irony. Thank you, I said. I appreciate you saying that. Do you forgive us? I considered the question seriously. I forgave you both years ago, David. Not because you earned it, but because carrying anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. Forgiveness was something I did for myself, not for you. As I left the building and walked toward my car, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because all the old wounds had been healed or all the relationships restored, but because I'd finally seen the situation with complete clarity. Madison and David had acted from selfishness and entitlement, causing real pain in pursuit of their own desires. But that pain had also been the catalyst for everything good in my current life. Without their betrayal, I might never have left Los Angeles, never have discovered my true capabilities, never have met Alexander. They had intended to take my future. Instead, they had given me a better one. 3 months later, Madison was awarded primary custody of her children. The judge cited her demonstrated commitment to their welfare and her ex-husband's pattern of prioritizing business interests over family responsibilities. David received generous visitation rights but lost his bid for primary custody. Madison sent me a simple text, "Thank you. Your testimony made the difference." I replied, "I'm glad your children will have stability. That's what matters." Alexander and I were in our Napa Valley home when I received the final update about the custody decision. We were sitting on the terrace watching the sunset paint the vineyard in shades of gold and amber, when my phone buzzed with Madison's message. "How do you feel?" Alexander asked after I'd read it aloud. I thought about the question, examining my emotional response to this conclusion of a story that had begun 8 years earlier in a very different place. "Complete," I said finally. "Like a circle has been closed. Do you think you and Madison will have a relationship now?" I considered the possibility, weighing what I knew about growth and change against what I understood about patterns and compatibility. Maybe someday. But it would have to be built on who we are now, not on trying to recapture something that never really existed. Alexander took my hand, his thumb tracing over my wedding ring. "I'm proud of how you handled all of this. The testimony, the boundaries, the compassion without compromise. I learned something important through this whole process," I said. Being family doesn't obligate you to accept poor treatment, but it also doesn't prevent you from offering help when you can do so without sacrificing yourself. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the devastated girl standing in her childhood bedroom to the confident woman sitting in her own home, surrounded by love and purpose she'd built with her own hands. Madison had stolen my wedding dress and my groom, thinking she was claiming my future. But futures can't be stolen, only redirected. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to embrace the redirection, you discover that the path you never planned to take leads exactly where you were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.